The wind came off the wall with a knife's certainty. Long breaths shaved from the highest blue that rasped the hairs on a man's neck and found the gaps between plates and wool. Under that wind, a white shadow threaded the trees like a second thought. Ghost moved low among black-scratched trunks and ruined drifts, pausing where the air changed. The world had smells layered into it like old parchment. Resin and cold iron, old ash and wet bark, vole dust and the feather musk of an owl whose gaze he felt but did not see. Beneath those lay another scent, thinner and almost not a scent at all. It had the taste of water that never knew a thaw, and it made the hair along his spine bristle before his mind named it. Wrong cold. Ghost stood so still that snow sifted against his paws, pale eyes whitening with reflected sky as he listened for the maddened scratching of things that remembered how to move but not why. He found a place where the wrong cold swam high, pooled around a half-sunk rotting of timber and sod, the footings of some vanished hall swallowed by the forest, and there the wind told him what it could not show. He smelled men where no blood ran, no breath smoked, no hunger had a voice. He knew what they were without understanding. He memorized the place as a ribbon of tree shadows and a slant of broken beam, of earth torn as if by a giant's rake. He swallowed the picture like a bone, turned, and streaked back toward the wall. On the topmost steps of the eastern parapet, Jon Snow had his hands laid flat to the ice. He stood bareheaded with his cloak pinned back, hair whipped thickly into his face, eyes down where the blue showed like a slow river sealed under glass. That old ice had a quiet Jon trusted more than the quiet of men. In its stillness, thoughts found their true size. The wall never promised safety. It promised that beyond it lay the measure of things. Snow ghosted sideways past the corner of his mind, and then full upon him, sudden whiteness, the taste of old cedar, powder snow that broke against a muzzle, cold like a song in bones, and a slick of wrong cold sitting in the hollows of the forest ahead like a man waiting in the dark. He gripped the crenel and shut his eyes because it struck so true he swayed, because for a heartbeat he was looking out of eyes without color, threading shadows that had names for him and meat that did not, and the only word in him was go. Ghost, Jon said, though the wolf was not there, and then he was. A light shape arriving like breath condensing, effortless among men who clanked and cursed. Ghost sat with his head high, muzzle dusted, and something fierce and intent in the lines of him that made even the king's men stop their muttered argument about firewood rations. Jon laid his palm to the red cold ear, felt the shiver and listened again, this time for the shape of his own decision. They had 2 fires burning in the yard, blue as they were bitter. The smell of pitch clung to wool and beard. Men shuffled the way men do when there is work not yet named. The Black Brothers looked to him because he was the Lord Commander, and to look elsewhere was to admit they remembered a time when they could. The king's men watched him because he was not theirs and because his choices had begun to drag their choices after, like a child hauling his toy on a string. Leathers, Jon called, and the big man came like a hill that had decided to walk. Dolorous Ed. Ed Tollett's eyes were as red-rimmed as a winter robin's. He nodded as if anything out of Jon's mouth could only somewhat disappoint him. If it's more digging, my lord, we've run out of ground. The gods keep hiding it under snow. We'll need a net, Jon said, ignoring Ed's sorrow. Iron chain if we've chain. Pitch torches. Dragon glass on every man if we can find it. It doesn't matter if you think you won't need it. Men who think that are precisely the ones who do. That set a quiet through them that felt like the moments before a wall breaks. The word dragonglass moved across the yard like something with its own breath. Some of the newer brothers touched their belts for blades they did not have. Others pressed the leather wraps where hidden knives lay. A young Malay hand from White Harbor asked a question with his eyes, and Ed spared him the mercy of answering. Obsidian, Ed said, making the word flat. It's glass what cuts like a quarrel and breaks if you look crosswise. We've some. Enough to make us optimistic and then bitter. Jon looked to the smithy where sparks popped like red bees. Rouse Donal Noise boy. Tell him every shard we have is to be set in wood. Daggers, spearheads, arrowheads. Don't hoard it. He turned to Ghost. Show me. The way the wolf ran that day made Jon feel the lines of his life settle into a path. The forest spread in spilled ink and charcoal, and the air bit harder with each mile. Behind them torches moved like echoed stars. As they went, the men stopped talking, as if the cold were a hand closing on their throats. It had snowed in the morning. Now the sky had cleared into a cold that rang. Ghost's path threaded low hollows and great fallen trees furred white, skirts of fir scrub that sighed where their branches shook down powder. John learned the scent by its absence, the way wrong cold swallowed pine and breath and the small damp of men and left behind a clean that was not clean. He kept seeing it the way Ghost had seen it, the ruin half swallowed by earth and time. They waited until dusk leached what little color was left from the wood. Then the light slid away, and the waiting changed nature. John's little company crouched with nets and poles, with lines and hooks and the one thing that men always have when they are afraid: the ability to do exactly what they were told. The first one came like a hinge opening in the dark. John heard fingers ticking on ice. A shape levered itself up out of the drift to his right and rolled onto stomach and began to crawl. It might have been any corpse until it turned its face to the scent of him, and the face had no more man in it than a felled log had spring. The second stood behind a shattered stump, lit from the side by the low blue of the hidden sun, hands working like blind fish. The third broke the crust under Ghost's silent paws when he floated past and the snow sank and flurried and a hand latched onto the wolf's hock. Fire took the first, a humph that tasted like pitch and tar and old fear. Dragon glass shattered in a skull with a soft sound John never wanted to hear again. He could not say later how they chose, only that he had said no fire for one, just this one, and that Ed had shot him a look the way a man looks at another just before he tells the worst joke he knows. They took the third. The net came down with a sound of chain on ice. It fought. There was something sickeningly tireless in the movements, like a puppet whose strings never tangled. It made no sound that was a word, and John was grateful for that. He had known men die with their sons' names in their mouths. He did not think he could look at this with a name on it. Leathers bore it down with his weight, growled in some half-remembered tongue as if the sounds could chain it, and Ghost came around behind with his white body loose and light and his teeth closed on the thing's ankle where the net left off, holding it in the world. They bundled it, bound it thrice where once would have sufficed for any man. Someone tried a prayer and someone else tried a curse. Neither did anything measurable. It bit through leather like biting through wet bark, and 3 men swore. No one laughed. They hauled it to its box. An iron-trimmed pine chest lined with stiff new-cut felt, borings for air. A carpenter in the village at the foot of the wall had made it while John watched, kept looking up as if the young Lord Commander might bless the thing. John had no blessing to give, so he gave orders. Snow packed the spaces around the body until only its head and chest stuck out of the drift inside the box, and when they shut the lid, frost ghosted off the seams like breath. He could feel men thinking as they trudged back with it, dragging the sled, breathing in unison because to breathe any other way would be to admit they were not together. The light went out of the trees and left a world of white and black. Behind him the forest began to make the small, strange noises forests make when the first true cold sits down. Ed walked beside the sled and did not look down. He kept his eyes on the line of John's shoulders instead, with the grim interest of a man expecting to see something break. When the wall loomed up at last, it had an old man's look, carved and weary and secure in its weariness. Men at the winch bent and rose. The chest climbed on ropes that creaked like old ships. When they levered it onto the yard, the brothers crowded, then eased away, then crowded again around the vacuum of their fear, as if daring and shame pushed them in turns. John stood longer than he needed to with his hand flat to the lid. He wanted to know what he wanted from this. A dozen answers rubbed at him like stones in a pocket. Victory, belief, survival, time. He lifted the latch and opened the lid a handspan. Cold edged out over his wrist in a strange way, too still, as if cold were a presence rather than a lack, and then he saw the eyes. Torchlight made slick veins of white in them, then the blue came up like depth. The mouth worked. The tongue had no color in it at all. A man he had known nothing about when he was alive snapped his black stumps of teeth at Jon Snow, and Jon Snow closed the lid. The world breathed out. He took Ghost with him to the king's tower, because when the night held its breath, John liked to have something breathing beside him that had never been a man. Stannis Baratheon was waiting in the solar with his fire banked low and his men arrayed like the pieces of a game he never meant to lose. Celis had gone to sleep hours ago with her lips like a cut. Melisandre stood at the far casement where her shadow fell like a blade. "You did it," Stannis said, and there was no joy in it because there was never joy in Stannis. Only the satisfaction of a stone fitting its niche. "You have your thing." "Proof," Jon said. He could hear the faintest thudding under the words, as if the cold itself made a sound. "We cannot kill it here. I won't. Not yet. We keep it cold. We keep it from meat. We show it to men who hold men's lives between their fingers and say, 'Here is your other war.' They will call it a trick," Melisandre murmured, red eyes a place where the fire lived. "Men love a trick when truth is worse." Jon accepted that. "They called a hand a trick," he said, "because by the time it reached them it was a charred thing in a jar. We'll not send this one by a man who hates us. I will take it. I will take it to every lord who will open his gate and half of those who will not." "You are sworn," Stannis said. He said it without heat. He did not believe it should stop Jon and therefore did not speak as if it would. "Your brothers will not thank you for leaving your post." "They will not thank me for anything I do," Jon said. The truth of it was a calmer thing than bitterness. "They will thank me if they live to do it, and only then. I am asking you for a letter under your seal to ease my way past gatehouses filled with men who want to think the only war they have is the one that keeps their songs alive." Stannis studied him with that miserable integrity of his. "You'll take a dozen of my queen's men. I'll take men who won't set fire to a hall by accident because they like the sound," Jon said, and Ed coughed once and tried too late to put it behind his glove. "I'll take Dolorous Ed, Leathers, Hareth son of Hareth. A handful of wildlings who know how to move unseen. Tormund if he'll go, though I won't ask him to endure a southern banquet and my account, and I'll take Ghost." He looked at Melisandre. "If you see flames that tell you any of this will turn worse by another road, tell me. I'll not pretend I do not believe you see some part of true things, but I'll not wait for flames to show me what a wolf has already shown. We have no time." "Where first?" Stannis asked. "Eastwatch by the sea," Jon said. "From there, ships to White Harbor. Wyman Manderley will open his gate to a black cloak and a king's seal. He is a man who understands hunger and docks and cold. From White Harbor to Gulltown if the winds favor. The Vale has horse and armor that sleeps. After that the Trident. Riverrun is broken, but Blackwood still holds. Harrenhal holds more ghosts than men. Farther south to King's Landing if the thing lasts, if it lasts, because whether it is Tommen or any other face that sits the chair, power still pools where gold and grain do. Dragonstone after for Obsidian. Dorne if we can. Old Town if they will see me. As far as I can take it before winter makes of the road a wall we cannot climb. Then back, with what aid we have won or not." "You will not come back the same," Melisandre said. The old red stone of the window behind her made a low glow in her throat. "None who carry proof to men are allowed to keep their innocence. It is a fair trade." "It's not hers to take," Jon said. "You speak of innocence as if it is a sheep that wanders into your yard by mistake," Ed said. "I've never seen one. They built him a cart with iron-bound wheels and rawhide hinges. Inside it the chest wept frost. He could feel the weight of the thing behind him when they set out. A pull that was not quite like any other burden. They had 4 shaggy ponies out of the Eastwatch stables with ears like shaved horn and stubbornness as steady as hunger. Men clanked behind. Men rode before. Above them the sky was a blue as hollow as a drum. Jon kept his left hand on the reins and his right on the short spear whose head was black glass set in ash. It felt wrong in his hand because it had never been meant to carry the weight of a man's trust. They made Eastwatch in 3 days because the wind did not break them. RYK led them across the drifts where a man on a big horse would have wasted himself. He read the ground the way a priest reads a prayer. At Eastwatch Cotter Pike swore at the sight of them and then swore again when Jon told him what he intended. "Take the bloody thing," Pike said, spitting into the snow. "Drop it on the small council's table and see if any of them start to pray. If it bites a few of them, all the better, says I. "Hold my firewood rations," Ed asked him. "We'll collect them on the way back. Maybe by then you'll have a roaring hearth." Pike barked a laugh like a gull's. He did not so much as smile otherwise. He gave John 2 ships. One cog with a wide belly that went by the honest name of Gull, and one lean galley with a captain who called himself Sertide because he had once defended a lord's harbor chains when he was young and thought titles could fit any man who reached for them. The chest went aboard Gull, lashed under canvas in the forward hold where the cold lived always. Ghost paced the deck as if sea were just another part of the wild. On the third morning ice floes shouldered like bulls around the harbor mouth, and then the sea opened and showed them a road. On that road the world felt large enough that men were small again in the right way. John stood with his hands on the rail and watched a sun that could not warm anything set off sparks on the sea. He slept in short drops between, waking to the soft thud he had come to know. Not the heart of a man, not any human rhythm, but the insistence of a thing that had forgotten the proper order of quiescence and movement and meant to do without it. White Harbor rose out of the pale like a story made stone. Towers frosting the sky, smells of fish and tar and bread coming strong even in winter because men must live. The Manderley merman flew green on the sea wind, and John felt a sudden ugly hope. Men who loved harbors and grain understood that winter meant something other than songs. They brought him up the great road with salt singing down the wagons in crystals and sailors with rope-burned hands stamping color into their feet. Wyman Manderley received John in a hall capacious as a full stomach and warm enough to feel dangerous even with snow flurries threading its length where a draft came through whispers in the stone. The Lord of White Harbor sat with rings on his fingers that winked like little private suns and eyes soft above cheeks fat with power. Near his chair stood a granddaughter with Manderley looks sharpened into a narrower face. She watched John the way a hawk watches a hare that has pretended too long to be a rock. The hall's noise took the owl-shaped great halls have when men have food and a reason to pretend the world is as it was. Lords bannermen quarreled under their breath. A singer tuned his lute to a fret that would break. A boy page forgot to step lightly and then stepped too lightly. The smell of the sea and roasting lamb braided with incense from the sept in the high tower, and with resin from green would not dry enough for a lord's hearth but burned anyway because it smelled of summer. "Lord Snow," Manderley said, voice deep and pleasant as a well that had seen its share of bodies. "My gate is your gate. My fish are your fish. If you've brought me a story, I'll give you a listening. If you've brought me the truth, I'll give you more." His eyes went to the cart behind John because every eye in the hall had gone to it. "What have you brought me?" "I'm sorry for what you're about to see," John said, because the words felt like a courtesy owed whatever else he had become. "I bring you proof." Ed and Leathers unlashed the chest, eased it forward across the rushes and the carved floor. The hall had gone quiet the way halls do when a man drags something across the GRA. "In of the world." John set his hand to the latch and looked once to Manderley. The Lord dipped his chin the way men do when they know they are about to be made to believe. The lid lifted, cold seeped. The white looked up. There was a small sound from the girl at Manderley's side, and a larger sound from one of the lesser lords who had spent a summer long ago trying to remember what winter was like. The thing's gums had gone smoothly white. The lips receded like a tide. The teeth knocked together in a rhythm that made no sense. Its hands, where they lay like fat fish upon the snow inside the chest, curled and uncurled as if remembering something they could not catch. Its eyes were a bright, inhuman blue that did not belong in any man's house. Someone prayed in a whisper. Someone else reached for a sword and stopped halfway, because a man in a lord's hall did not draw steel without a command. Ghost bristled like frost against wood. Manderley did not move for a long time. John watched his eyes, not the thing in the box. He saw their surprise and offense and fear and something like gratitude. The Lord had wanted the world to give him a reason to be larger than himself. The world had obliged. "My cooks keep an ice cellar," Manderley said at last, voice steady enough the hall could find its floor again. "In high summer a man could hang a man there entire and he would not spoil for a fortnight. In winter it is as cold as any prayer. We will put this in there, if you wish it so, Lord Commander, and you will tell me what you need of White Harbor." You will tell me what men to send and to where and what to make in the forges that will bite harder than steel does. If there is a tax upon salt that must be remitted to a capital, I will not remit it. If there is a ship that will not go for fear of winter's mouth, I will put men aboard who fear me more than winter." He did not smile, because this was not a smiling thing, but there was a lift in the flesh of his face that meant satisfaction of a kind men cannot confess. John bowed his head. "Obsidian," John said. "Dragonstone has it in its bones. We had stores from ancient days at the wall. We have used too much. Send for it with such coin as you must. Buy it, steal it, promise your daughter to a rock if it will bring us crates of the stuff. Hearth will teach your men how to set it. Spears, arrows, knives. If we have it, we can make holes in winter. And send grain north. Stannis will starve before he surrenders. He will starve you too. Better to be poor with food than rich in hunger." Manderly snorted his troubled assent. "I will write to the lords of the north," he said. He named them, and each name was a weight that pressed someone in the hall. Then softly, "Will you carry this to Winterfell, Jon Snow?" Jon held the Lord's eyes long enough that the hall went restless around them. "If Roose Bolton will open his gates to me, I will show him this first and last. But I doubt he will open to me at all. So I will go where a gate may open, to the Vale, to men who have spent their winters behind stone and think themselves safe because they have not yet seen what is coming over stone." "You are your father's son," Manderly said. It sounded like something he had meant all his life and only gotten around to saying. "I will give you ice." They stored the chest in the Lord's ice cellar, chained beneath a grating thick enough to keep down a bull. There in that blue dark, the thing's breathless working plucked at the air. Jon dreamed that night of a sea that did not move and of his feet sinking into it as if it were flour. Ghost curled on the foot of his bed, and in the dream the wolf's eyes were open and had a thin rim of silver around them, as if a moon had cracked and lodged there. They left White Harbor with 2 carts now, their chest in one, and in the other ice, node after great translucent node of it like thick glass, wrapped in straw. Squat sailors and street boys loaded it cheerfully and swore at each other with the clean vigor of men who had chosen to live where a big man's hunger does not keep small men alive. Gull and Sere Tide rode low with new linens and grain and corals, then south and east across a sea that had forgotten summer entirely. At Gulltown the sky was a washed, faded color like old salt. The walls went up out of the sea with mathematics and stubbornness. They craned the chest up to the harbor stones with thick rope and men singing because men sing when they have heavy things to lift, and Jon's breath fogged the silver where it hung. The high steward came himself to meet them, because a king's seal and a night's watch cloaked together make men curious. Peter Baelish waited on the slope where the road began to climb into sky, spidery and careful, with a boy's face at his side that would have been handsome if it had not been wearing fear like a glove. A girl stood behind the Lord Protector, her hair plain as a novice's and her dress suitable to the bastard daughter of a minor lord. Her eyes were brown, the color of old tea. Jon had thought sometimes, when the nights ran too long, that he would never see a Stark girl again, not under a roof. The knowledge fell into him and slid to a place where he could not reach it. "Lord Commander," Peter said. The mouth smiled. The eyes did not. "The Vale is honored. How cold your box looks. The Vale enjoys cold in moderation. The Vale will enjoy less if it does not learn to sharpen it," Jon said. There was something in Peter that drew words into his pocket and disappeared them. Jon watched the man's hand drift unconsciously to a ring that had once belonged to someone else. The boy lord beside him coughed a cough too thin for any boy who had been allowed the outdoors, and the bastard girl put a hand on his sleeve, soothing. Her fingers, Jon could swear, had a north in them, a way of laying on an arm that put him in mind of a winter day 30 men and 2 girls ago when he had watched his sister adjust a bee. "Rydell, I would not have a child frightened," Jon said, and meant it. "So we will show what we must to those who must be shown, and we will not force any other eyes to look." Peter regarded him as if he were a problem that did not belong on the page. "You propose a private audience, then?" "I propose that the Vale wakes," Jon said. So they went to a cold chamber with a long slit of a window from which the sea looked like a ribbon of lead. There, surrounded by men who wore steel as if they had done more in it than strut, John unlatched the chest. He did not need to look at the white's face to feel the temperature drop. He kept his eyes instead on the watchers. Peter's hands did not move. The boys did, in a flinching way that would be a child's forever. The girls stopped on the back of a chair so gently that the wood did not complain. Hightower men would say later that sometimes memory wears a body like a mask. John would not know how to answer them. A trick. One of the Bronze Yohn's cousins murmured out of a corner of his mouth, transfiguring his fear by making it common. The woman steward of Runestone drew steel without asking permission first, and her blade made meaning in the air. "It is not a trick," the bastard girl said softly. She was already gone again into herself, but she had said it, and in the saying the room had to decide. "It is not," the boy lord whispered. He could not stop looking. He could not bear to look. Peter's mouth smiled again with a small downward tilt at one corner, as if he regretted that reality should press on him inconveniently at this hour of the morning. He did not argue. He did not agree. He accepted the premise and began to play the game the premise allowed. "The Knights of the Vale enjoy their mountains," Peter said. "Dragging them from them requires a promise that the slopes will still be there when they return. Convince me, and them, that their horses will not die in snow before they meet your others." John did not say that death in snow was the part a man took upon himself in exchange for making himself a lord of horses. He had learned that saying a thing many times did not make men believe it. He described instead roads hammered by iron to let carts use them in snow. Men of the clans who would lead under a truce and never stay where they were not invited. Harbors stocked with grain not because it would make a man money, but because failing to stock them meant men died, and then a lord had nameless dead at his gate by another road. "How much?" Peter asked quietly. He meant coin. John told him. He saw Peter do the quick arithmetic. His mind long since trained to translate lives into sums and back again until the difference bored him. The Lord Protector agreed, slowly, reluctantly, with the air of a man inclining to a principle. John knew what it was. Men like Peter do not put their banners anywhere but on the right hill. If the Vale did not move with all it had, it would at least not be left sleeping. He took the chest to other rooms and other halls, up mountain roads where 3 men labored for every one step the cart made, and the wind skittered along the edges like a boy daring his own fear. They showed the thing to Stone, to Redfort, to the small keeps clinging to cliffs like barnacles, and to the wider places where rich men later said comfortably they had known all along. It bit a man on the thumb through a glove. It chattered at a dog that had never hunted anything larger than a hare, and made the dog howl until it vomited. Men tried to laugh and the laugh died, a gut wound of sound that made some of them angry. The chest went back down the cliff-snake roads to the sea with something like work accomplished and something like an emptiness. Persuasion is work that always takes too much. In the Riverlands winter had knifed through and then set. Rivers narrowed to a steady, tricking sound. Reeds made strange brown banners where men had not cut them. John took the chest through a land where most of the dead had names and banners and where name and banner had not saved them. He stopped at Raventree Hall because they told him the Blackwoods still held, and because the ancient Weirwood there remembered winters enough to count. Lord Tyto's Blackwood met him with a dignity the cold could not reach and a weariness it could. In the shadow of that great old heart tree John did not need to open the box. The heart tree's face, with sap hardened in its eyes like frozen tears, seemed sufficient to speak for winter. But he opened it anyway. Blackwood's archers watched with the bowed patience of men who know what the arc of an arrow means and what it does not. Long, long ago, Tyto said after, as if making a ledger of what he owed John and what he owed the dead. Men built fires they did not sit close enough to. We will not be those men again if we can help it. You shall have 1,000 shafts by spring, if the trees give us that many. You shall have men who can loose on a shouted number and hit what is meant. You shall have ravens to any lord who will not let you pass his gate. The phrase would not let him pass. He did not try the twins. He valued his throat. Instead he showed the thing in towns too small to boast a proper name, where smallholders clustered in and watched in silence and took in breath altogether for the first time all day when he closed the lid. He began to learn the faces men made when they understood the shape of the winter coming. and it was not a face he had expected. There was less fear in it than he had guessed and more stubbornness. The way a man looks when he knows he will do a thing he dislikes and will do it thoroughly. On a road south of Derry, a band of brazen men in patched crimson tried to take the cart and the horses and Ghost. That went the way such things go when a white wolf tears out a leader's hamstring before the man has quite finished his boast. After Ed cleaned his blade with resigned care and said, "I always want Ed to die in an unremarkable way, you know. I thought it would save people time later." "What would be remarkable?" John asked, because he needed smiling, and Ed was the kind of man who worked best when he was not asked to mean anything. "Choking on a bone in a king's hall while a singer is arguing with a noblewoman about rhymes," Ed said. "A thing like that would take up space in a man's head and push out the true business. We should aim to be a footnote, my lord." King's Landing was a stain of smoke and gold on the winter sea. They came under those red walls with their cartwheels wrapped in leather and their letters under seals, and they were still sent to wait. The Red Keep took time to notice any single man unless he had the leisure to make himself noticed. John did not. He slept his first night inside the city in a fishmonger's loft. Ghost watched the door without a sound. He went to the keep with Stannis's letter in his glove and the black cloak on his shoulders and the chest that steamed a little when they rolled it into the sunshine. The guards looked at him the way men look at anything that claims to be more important than the thing they themselves are guarding. He asked for the hand and settled for anyone who had the keys to the room where decisions were spoken aloud. In the hall of the hand, the air had the stale sweetness of wine that had once been spilled and was now dry. Tommen sat on the throne under a blanket no one would admit was there. Cersei stood near with a face like a sword. Marjorie smiled as if the world were one story and she had picked the right one. Qyburn's mild expression was the mildness of a man watching that last drop of tincture at the bottom of the glass and hoping it did not fall on his slipper. "Lord Commander," Cersei said, and made of the words a rebuke for not being anything else. "We were given to understand that the Night's Watch still obeyed its vows. The capital is no place for you." "The Watch obeys," Jon said. "It guards the realms of men. If the realms do not understand what it is they need guarding from, the guarding is a story we tell ourselves while the wall cracks." Qyburn drifted near the cart. "Might we have a look?" he asked, as if asking to examine a mole. "Swear on the faith that nothing in this room will be harmed," Cersei said, because she knew the shape of spectacles. Jon looked to Tommen. The boy's cheeks were flushed with the heat in the hall, and his hair lay damp with crown sweat. He had a kind mouth that made Jon sad in a way he didn't have time for. "I swear," Jon said, and meant it as far as he could. He did not promise beyond his reach. He lifted the latch. The thing in the chest rose with a jerk as if its strings had been pulled. It had not slept as men do. It had been not moving, and now it moved. Cersei's hand went to a dagger in her sleeve and did not draw it. Marjorie's breath caught in a small intake she made into a smile. Tommen lifted his hand, not knowing whether it was to bless a knight or cradle a cat. Qyburn bent like a student who had found proof of some theorem. He had pursued down 3 ruined careers. "It bites," Jon said evenly. "Do not put your hands near it." "Remarkable," Qyburn murmured, as if Jon had presented him with a puppet. He reached for forceps. Ghost growled, a sound that sat in men's bellies and shoved. This is cold that does not dissipate." Qyburn's eyes glinted. "If the heart is removed, if the head is separated, we might learn." "No," Jon said. He did not know whether Qyburn wanted to save it or slaughter it, and he found he did not care. He shut the lid and let the clasp fall. The sound was like an end struck with the flat of a hand. "Tricks," one of the lords said. The word was lazy. Jon thought of Alistair Thorne's jar with its black meat at the bottom, and the small council laughing to show each other they knew more about the world than they once had. He thought of men who needed laughter like a cloak for their cowardice and of reason used like a wall. He did not argue. He had learned that proofs are animals. They will not stand forever in a single hall. "The wall will ask for grain," Jon said instead, "and boats, and the right to cut trees in any lord's wood if the need is there. It will ask for carts and men who can shoe a horse and men who can build a bridge when a river decides it will not be crossed at the old place. It will ask for obsidian from Dragonstone. It will not ask for singers. Tommen nodded as if he had understood all his life. Cersei's face gave nothing. Marjorie smiled. Qyburn tilted his head and filed his interest under the letter R for later. The hall sighed around them the way halls do when the smell of wine grows thick and men remember that they are warm. Jon took the chest from the city before the day went and put it in a low boat that rocked in the shadow of the Blackwater's chain towers. Ser Tide's galley slipped him across the water to Dragonstone under the slow swing of the lanterns. The castle rose like a thing grown rather than built, like a statement in black basalt. It seemed to him fitting that this was where men could still find the black glass that cut the blue clean. The lord who held the island in Stannis' absence had the look of a quill pusher whose hand had learned to bear weight. He did not smile. He did not ask questions that wasted time. Jon spoke plainly and left the box shut. The man walked with him to a cellar where the walls sweated and the floor held great heaps of obsidian that ran like frozen water. Jon put his hand to the pile and felt the old heat of the world in stone that took light and did not give it back. "How much?" the steward of Dragonstone asked. "All," Jon wanted to say. He said instead the largest number it made sense to say to such a man in such a place in such a time. The man's eyes moved, making a calculation that turned rock into coin and then into living men's hands. He nodded. "We will need char. Coal," he said. "Wood, resin, molds for spearheads. We can send you crates of the raw stone, but that will be slower work on your end. Better if we pour them here. Better if we teach your smiths here for a fortnight and never stop pouring." "Do that," Jon said, "and send it north as if winter were a thing that climbs stairs. Because it is." He had never loved a thing less than he loved the sea by then, but the sea gave him a road he could not have had otherwise. They went east enough to taste bravos in the wind, then south until the world remembered how to smell of orange and horse blanket and hot iron. Sunspear's spears looked dull in winter light. The water gardens whispered in a tongue made of falling. Doran Martell was a man who had learned to put a hand on patience until it stopped moving. He listened to Jon with his eyes lidded as if he were half asleep, and when Jon would have opened the chest, Doran lifted 2 fingers and said, "No, I will believe you without it because I have believed too many things late in life. But let it be done on the sand before the water gardens when the children are away, so the guards can be afraid and then be unafraid together." It was warmer here and the thing inside the chest worked less. A laboring of broken parts that did not want to move in wet air. Doran frowned a little. "Heat troubles it," he observed. "If we could heat the world." "We cannot," Jon said. "We can only heat halls and towns and men. Keep your men to your walls. Send ships north if you will. Send glassmakers and cunning men with their little clever hands. Send archers if you're willing to bury them in snow. Do this and the songs will be the same later, even if none of the singers remember why." "My son would have liked you," Doran said almost to himself. "He liked men who were not made of talk. We will send ships with stone packed inside them and men who know how to make glass sing. We will send oranges because a man with scurvy fights for no man." Old Town was a voyage back into ideas that wore robes. The high tower rose into a sky that had learned in its youth the name of clouds and now only watched them go by. The conclave sent one archmaester with rings so numerous his wrist had thickened beneath them and another without a single ring at all who did not bother to hide his scorn for all men's certainties. In the piazza of the citadel where gulls walked with a singular lack of piety, Jon opened the chest because he knew these men would require it. They argued before he had even unlatched it, about numbers and winters, about the nature of a thing that moved without breath, about whether the blue was a property of a substance or of a force. He listened and, as always, did not join. He lifted the lid. The thing flailed its arms as if retrieving an argument it had once dropped. The archmaester with too many rings went very white and then very calm. The one with none stepped forward as if to touch and ghost butted him in the thigh with his head so firmly the man staggered and lost 2 days' worth of learning in an instant. "It is cold to the eye," the ringed man said, voice steady. But to the fingers it is simply cold. Not so cold as the air in some winters. Yet see the breath condensing on the wood. He leaned in very far, holding himself still by a mighty effort. There are substances that give off cold. I do not know if the converse is true. It is giving off hunger, John said. He shut the lid. If you will not send me learning, send me crossbow bolts and cord. If you will not send those, send me honest men who can keep records of which Lord sent what, when, and to whom. The Archmaester said, a book will outlast a war. He meant it as a promise. John took it as a warning. He left Old Town with a ledger thicker by a finger and with crates of sealing wax and cord. He had one less there than he had hoped. Sometimes men who know many things use knowledge as a wall. On the return north, the sea turned truly cruel. The sky went a hard pewter color and a long, slow swell slapped the hulls until the wood grew sullen. Men moved slowly and did not smile. An iron-borne longship shouldered out of the day like a threat come into being. It cut the water with that long, disdainful ease their ships have, and its prow carved foam as cleanly as a knife sauce. Boarding hooks, certaitznar. Archers. The iron-born came bareheaded, with hair like beached weed and eyes that wanted nothing except to want. It might have been clean work if not for the thing in the chest. During the first smashing of hull on hull, someone jostled the cart. The lid slid one finger width and then two, and Ghost went mad. He threw himself at the cart and scrabbled to keep the lid down with his paws, and John thought for a moment that he had lived every piece of his life so far in order to be here with his body thrown over a box while knives fell like rain. An iron-born with his face tattooed in blue seized the cart from the other side and tried to haul the lid up because if it frightened John, it must be treasure. John's spear went into the man's shoulder and stuck. The man looked annoyed and then died the way a man dies when there is nowhere for him to go. Ghost's teeth sank through a second man's calf. Ed discovered a new despairing paragraph of curses appropriate to men who doubt they will live to see their supper, and then the longship sheared off because the iron-born like easy work and this was not. John sat afterward with his back to the chest until the shivering left his hands. He pressed his forehead to the chill wood. He wanted, absurdly and fiercely, to apologize, to the thing that once had been a man and was now a hungry body in a box, to his brothers heading down from market halls toward winter like cows to a gate, to everything he had tried to outpace. Don't, Ed said, seeing what he was doing and always choosing to hear the thing no one said out loud. If we start apologizing to it, we shall Ave to apologize to all our boots for treading snow and it will never end. If we live through this, the world will be sad in the usual ways again. That will be a comfort. They made the bite before a storm that wanted to be a siege arrived and slammed the world shut. White Harbor stood again like a reprieve. Manderley sent men down to haul the cart as if it contained his own winter. He had kept his letters moving like fish, and the North answered in the way the North does, with actions that began slow and then did not stop. From White Harbor John went north by sleigh where horses had no business being. The chest groaned like an old man who has decided to get up anyway. They stopped once by a brook that cracked under its own thought, and Ghost took a trout out of it because it had betrayed its hiding by the thin stream of water that kept its gill from freezing shut. When the wall came into sight, its face looked different to John's eyes. He had spent the last months lifting its shadow and setting it down in other men's halls. He had set the wall inside other men's minds, and he wondered what that would make of it. He wondered what it would make of him. Stannis had men on the move with the stubborn stupidity of honest plans. Wildlings drilled under the eyes of brothers who would not stop hating them but would perhaps stop saying so out loud for the span of a battle. Smithies had been coaxed to pour black glass into shapes that made a sound like promise when you set them down together. On the yard, a row of arrowheads gleamed like the insides of storm clouds. On the eastern road, the first of the Manderley carts with grain rattled in, and Cotter Pike swore softly as if he had hoped it would not be necessary to forgive anybody for anything. The chest went into a vault dug 3 men deep under stone. John stood with Ghost beside it. Above them the wall breathed its old breath. He thought of doors and proofs and the way men change when they see a thing with their eyes that their minds forbid. He thought of his sister's face the day she had tried to hold a smile like a bridle in her mouth and could not quite. He thought of the boy lord of the Vale and of the girl behind Peter Baelish, whose hand had gone still on a chair. Winter came with its first true voice one long night when every draught carried knives. Men woke because they did. The cold was in their throats like shame. On the east watch a horn blew and kept on blowing until it was a man's sob. Men took their places with the stupid nobility of creatures that learn by doing. John stood on the top of the wall with Dragonglass and Ghost and the Old Blue below him. They came out of the wood the way fog comes when sea loses its patience. Whites first, in their 100 and then their 1,000, walking with ill-remembered grace and the lusterless purpose of tools. Beyond them and among them the cold grew articulate. John saw it in a stillness that moved and did not, in a color that was not a color but a depth. And then the others stood where no man had ever had the right to stand. They were beautiful the way a void can be beautiful. Frost fluted their limbs, and their eyes made the world the wrong shade of true. The dragonglass in John's hand thrummed when he lifted it, an instrument that had found its song. Ghost lowered his body until his belly brushed the snow. Men forgot entirely to pray, and John was glad. Prayer is a way of holding back breath, and they would need to breathe. Loose, he said, and 500 black-fletched shafts went into the air. In their path the world seemed to change its mind about its rules. Whites came apart as a field does under fire. The others turned their heads as one, as if listening to something only they could hear. One stepped forward, the air around him crisped to silver. He lifted a hand as if considering rain. A man on John's left lost his wits and ran toward the stairs because sometimes courage is the half-step you do not take. John did not watch. He watched instead the place where his spear point would need to go. The first of the others came up the ice face with their weird unmotion like a thought. They moved without moving parts. Ghost flung himself and took the world's throat between his teeth. An other's blade came around like a quiet that never ends. It touched the spear point in John's hand and shrilled very softly, and then cracked with a sound a man could feel in his teeth. John did not know he had shouted until his breath burned and the thing before him let its beauty shatter. It went the way a mirror does, all at once, as if being itself had never been as solid as men thought. The blue went out. Where the dragonglass spear passed there was a wrong-smelling smoke that was not smoke at all. Another came, another broke. Archers wept because cold makes tears, and the tears iced and clung to lashes like new rings. They would tell later of that day in 100 halls. They would tell of men who did not run and of men who did. They would tell of a white wolf whose mouth was black at the corners and of a man with north in his face who had come to their lord's hall with a box of cold and had left with their promise. And that promise had ended here on ice with bright blue breaking like glass. Toward sunset the others withdrew the way a tide will sometimes, into a dark that did not recede so much as go on existing elsewhere. The field below the wall was a butcher's yard. Men leaned against merlins and found that the stone made their spines ache less. Stannis stood with his hand on a standard as if it would steady him to feel something that wanted not to move. Ed sat down, and for the first time John had ever seen, his face relaxed. "I'm not saying it was a bad day," Ed said. "But if we live, I intend to complain about it every morning until I die. It will be a comfort." John put his hand on Ghost's shoulder and felt the wolf's breath go in and out. He thought of the warm halls where he had opened the box and let winter into rooms that were not made for it, and he felt a complicated gratitude for every face that had gone still and then had not turned away. Proof is an animal. It can be led but not carried, and when it has done its work, it goes ahead on its own legs. That night the men who had not slept like felled trees. John stood a time alone at the top of the wall with the sky, which did not care what any man believed. He felt Ghost's head press against his hand, his ribs, his thigh. Felt in his body the memory of blackness where sight becomes smell becomes will. He felt, too, the long, dumb love of ice for itself. He let the whole of it wash past and through him until his heart found its smaller beat. He had not brought every lord to the wall with him. Some would wait, some would lie, some would sing of other wars. But enough had seen. Enough had bent their will. Enough had sent grain and glass and men. The wind cut again along the ice. Somewhere below, Men stirred and groaned in their blankets and reached for warmth because they were still men and would be until they were dead. John looked north because the world always insisted on having more of itself. Ghost raised his muzzle and sang one long, low note that did not try to make the night into anything other than it was. John closed his eyes and heard, for once, no voices but that one. He did not know yet what it meant to win this thing or what winning would ask of him. He knew only that he had chosen and that the choosing had made him a man who could stand with proof in his hands and tell men what they owed. He knew only that tomorrow would come, and that he would open the chest again for someone somewhere, and that the world would do as it had always done. Put truth in front of men and make of them the measure of it.